Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. About 35 years ago, I visited Israel for the first time. It was Passover, the mid-1980s, and my family toured the country. At one stop, we met a man who was missing both legs. He went on to tell us a story, how he had fought in the Yom Kippur War, how he had been severely injured but had survived, and now did everything he could to live life to its fullest. I mentioned this story since on today's episode, this is our topic. Since October 7, dozens, probably close already to 100 soldiers have lost limbs in the fighting in Gaza, in the West Bank, and in the North. It is a scale and number not known to Israel, and is the result of two reasons. First have been the tough battles, particularly in the Gaza Strip, but also the fact that the IDF and Israeli hospitals know today how to save lives more than ever in the past. It comes with the price, the loss of a limb, but the life is saved. So on today's episode, we do a deep dive into the rehabilitation of soldiers, those who have lost limbs and those who suffer from TBI, traumatic brain injury. I speak with two. Leah Spitz Goldenhirsch, whose son Ari lost both legs and one arm in the war in Gaza, and continues to be a young man in his 20s, smiling and doing everything he can to live life to its fullest. Leah tells us about Ari, what happened when a building he was in Gaza exploded, and how his battle to regain the ability to walk continues. Just to note that we had a small technical issue with this interview. I then speak to Adi Gidali, a physical therapist who specializes in TBI. Adi shares with us stories from the rehabilitation ward in Tel HaShomer Hospital, and where she draws her inspiration from. It's not a tough guess. It's from those soldiers. This is an inspirational episode. I invite you to listen. Here we go. Leah Goldenhirsch, Spitz, it's great to have you with us on the JPPI podcast. Thank you so much for joining. And
Pleasure.
I mean, we're here to talk about your son Ari, and I guess also your story and your family's story and everything that's going on. I think there's probably no one, definitely in Israel, but probably in the Jewish world entirety, who hasn't heard that name somewhere, right? And heard something about the story of Ari. So why don't we just start from the beginning? Tell us who Ari is, what happened, and then we'll talk a bit about more of what the situation is today.
Okay. So Ari's 22 years old. He was actually, if we go back 22 years, he was actually born the Seder night, at the night of the Park Hotel, big Pigua terrorist attack in Netanya. So it was a very challenging night for the Jewish people as a whole, and was a very obviously exciting night for us. He's the oldest of 5 children. Ari served in Givati for a year and a half, for 18 months. He was scheduled to go back to yeshiva. He had learned in a yeshiva in the Golan and was scheduled to go back to yeshiva October 15th. He had a trip to Italy planned with 4 friends, that everything was planned to leave on October 8th to get back to go to yeshiva. And then October 7th happened. He was already on his leave from the army, which is a few days off that you have at the end of your army service before you go back to the army. And as he and his friends, were preparing for the trip, October 7th happened. They were called back to the army, all his friends. His officer, who was supposed to get promoted to a different role, came back and took again the commanding of their unit, and started fighting in Gaza a few weeks after October 7th. Some guys, because they had returned their equipment, they didn't actually participate in the battles on October 7th as a unit. Only the people who hadn't returned their uniform, hadn't returned their equipment. He himself did not. But then they went in to Gaza. They were in for many, many, many weeks at a time. The day of the explosion, they went in and conquered a house. So as they conquered the bottom of the house, they were in a city called Zaytun, and they conquered the bottom part of the house. They were about to go into the second floor in the house. They opened up a door, and unexpectedly they saw an entrance to a tunnel, which they did not expect to see. Saif then told everybody to take a step back. He called the head of the Mempe, which is the head of the
company commander.
He called the company commander to come as well. Was about to throw a grenade, and before he had a chance to do so, the whole house exploded. Saif and Yiftach Shachar, Itai Saif and Yiftach Shachar were both killed instantly, and 10 soldiers were injured. After realizing that he had a very, very weak pulse, he realized unexpectedly an armed vehicle from a different unit came and had a big sign up that said that to realize this was his opportunity to save him. Decided, which was against the standard protocol, to have him leave in this armed vehicle alone. Standard is they leave, that all of them go together for better protection, but realized that Ari didn't have the time to be able to do that. He got to the helicopter. Again, there they made the same decision to have him fly in a helicopter right away. And he got to the operating room within 42 minutes of the explosion. During that time of the whole evacuation, he got 3 pints of blood. In order to keep him alive in the operating room initially, he got another 15 pints of blood. So by the end of that day one, he was up to 20 pints of blood.
Wow.
We were notified by phone. In Israel, all parents who have sons in the army are petrified of a knock on the door. And so that's what happens if, God forbid, your child is killed. The officers come to your house and knock on the door. In order to not confuse parents when your child is severely injured, the officers come outside your door, wait outside the door and call you on the phone so that they're ready to take you, but notify you by phone before knocking on your door. We were on the way to volunteer for that day in agriculture, so we weren't home. We were on our way down south, actually, to someplace not far from Soroka Hospital, which is where he was evacuated to. And so we ended up continuing to drive on our own to Soroka Hospital to be able to get there. We got there about 45 minutes within being called, about an hour and a half after he had gotten there. And then it took us another hour and a half to find out what his exact injuries were. Once we found the doctor finished operating on him, we were told that he had lost his right leg above his knee, his left leg below his knee, his right hand, and his left hand was extremely injured. This was obviously nothing that any parent ever expects to hear, but we made a decision both in the car and as we got to the, as we heard this, that our lives were good and our lives are going to continue to be good. And salvation really comes from God. And it's in our control. What we can control within this difficult situation is to turn to people, to pray, to do good deeds, and anything that will help Ari with the merit. We also realize.
So Leah, how do you understand what happened back at the tunnel explosion? That 2 soldiers were killed, 10 were wounded. Ari was the most wounded, it seems, right? With, to lose an arm, 2 legs, and have the one last arm severely damaged and wounded. Why did he sustain so much of those? Was it he stood closer than others? The blast was he took more of the blast. Like, I'm just curious from that technical perspective.
He was at the other side of the entrance to the building. So he got the whole explosion from the whole stairway. It took them a long time to figure it out. There was some sort of video of the actual explosion, which was destroyed because you really saw it was a very gruesome video, but it appeared that the whole stairway exploded. So it probably exploded on him.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he got it, because he was not standing behind the officers. Those who were standing behind the officers were the ones killed. I'm just trying to plug my phone. Okay. Where those who were standing behind the officers were injured actually less severely because they took that step back. So they were further away than the explosion.
And the other one, the officers, they I guess sustained the most of it. So that, and sadly, tragically, that's why they were killed. Right.
Correct.
But I'm curious. So, and his injuries, I mean, I don't know how this all works. So you can explain to us. But the limbs that he lost, that was from the initial explosion, or he was so wounded that in the hospital, that was the result of the surgeries to save his life.
So his right hand he lost in the explosion. So he was already on the helicopter without his hand. His left legs were severely damaged, but all the doctors who examined him knew that meant he was going to get amputated.
He was sedated or in a coma, or for a very long time, and weeks on weeks. And what was that period like?
So obviously it's a lot of ups and downs. I mean, for the first 3 weeks, he was really between life and death. He developed a very severe lung condition from getting such major surgery and from the trauma of his body getting so many pints of blood. So he developed a very, very severe ARDS, it's called, which is really when your lungs go into complete trauma. And after the 3 weeks, they tried almost every day to try to wake him up. and his body just wasn't ready. His body would react with extremely high fever. He would go up to 104 for days and days on end every time they tried to wake him up. His blood pressure would skyrocket, and it was very, very clear that he wasn't ready to be woken up, but we didn't know what would happen. We didn't know if he would wake up, how he would wake up, etc. And we've learned through this whole process that God has his ways of doing things. And it's sometimes what we think is the best for him isn't really the best for him. And now looking back at that really, really challenging period of time, it was the biggest gift that he could have ever gotten, because he woke up pain-free. He woke up with most of the surgeries had been done. He went through 8 surgeries during that time. And people who have gone through those type of things, every time you're put back in for surgery and every time you go through it, it's very, very traumatic. And he didn't go through any of that. It was traumatic for us, but not for him. He woke up really feeling good and feeling very, very positive about it. And what's also incredible for him in terms of that whole process is also got us to adjust. Hearing your child lost both his legs and his right arm is something that now I can say it and can have a smile on my face. But for the first few weeks, saying those words would make me, cry. And having him wake up when we were already in a place of power and feeling strength and not feeling that was extremely challenging. It also allowed us during those 6 weeks to meet people who have gone through similar injuries and have lived full life. Whether it was somebody from the Yom Kippur War who's already, got a degree and married and children and was able to manage a department of social workers as a professional career and came to visit us and drove down to Soroka to visit us, or with somebody else who came in with his uniform, a tactical uniform, and he comes up to us and says, I have similar injuries to your son. And we looked at him and said, you must be confused with the family, because who has a tactical uniform when they have 2 legs amputated? And then he picked up his army pants and he had both prosthetics on both of his legs.
Wow.
The head of the K'tzin Chinuch Rashi, the head of the education within the army, has an amputation on one leg above the knee from also Gaza, fighting in Gaza. So we really, through that period of time, were able to meet very, very inspirational people who were able to show us how you can really live a very, very full life within that.
Right. So
that child.
you keep on mentioning, Leah, above the knee, below the knee, and I know that's an important distinction.
Yeah.
Can you explain to people why does that make a difference if you're amputated above or below the knee?
Most of our walking power is done from our knee, and the bending of the knee is extremely critical. And so when you have a prosthetic below the knee, it's just a simple stick with a foot, basically. I mean, obviously there's more to it than that, but
Sure.
that's the essence of it. When you start getting into, when you don't have a knee, you need to have a bionic knee that the government of Israel pays for these soldiers, which is extremely expensive. It's about $120,000 for that knee. And it's you have to learn to trust the knee. When you start learning how to walk, the knee responds to your movements, and until you learn how to use it and to get used to it, it needs to be trusted. And there are certain things you'll never be able to do. So one of the things that Ari now, is learning how to do is if he's on the floor, how you get up. And when you only have one knee, or if you don't have a knee, getting up from the floor is one of the hardest things to do. And especially people who have lost both knees. There are quite a few amputees who have lost both knees during this war, and their whole way of learning how to walk is completely different. They actually start on something called stubbies, which is these short prosthetics, and every few months they get added about 3 inches to their prosthetics till they get back to their normal height. So the knees is like the biggest gift that Ari has, is that he was left with his knee.
On one of his legs. And right. And I've seen pictures of Ari in videos. Sometimes I've seen him like a little motor scooter type of thing. I saw him, it was a beautiful movie, little video of Ari going to a wedding and making a bracha, blessing under the chuppah. Very moving to see. But I also have seen him in pictures, to our listeners and viewers, just so you know, Leah has set up this WhatsApp groups, multiple now, I think, because there's just so many people. With updates, regular updates of Ari and what's happening and what's going on, and let's give this prayer, let's give that prayer. So we also get to see pictures every once in a while, and there was one of him standing recently with a couple other soldiers who had lost limbs, but you saw him standing on 2 prosthetics,
Yeah,
and standing with 2 sticks, I guess like walking sticks, canes.
that's one. You saw somebody else with 2. He only
Somebody
had
else
one.
with 2. I apologize. So where's he at now in terms of that rehabilitation? What stage is he at?
So he is thankfully walking unbelievably. For his stage within it, the Israeli government makes you try out 2 different knees because they're so expensive. They want to make sure that you're really making the right choice for you and not one that's the coolest fad within the rehab center. So he spends his weeks at the rehab, he's learning how to walk and learning how to, do other to become independent, which he really is independent. He had his first driving lesson today. He's hoping to get his license. That's for him, to be able to drive an
A new license, right? He needs to
new license.
learn how
Yeah,
to drive again, basically.
adapted, like, right,
Right.
exactly, with his hands, with one hand and his hand prosthetic. And he's had many, many times within the past few weeks where he's gotten to places which aren't wheelchair accessible, and he's walked up and down steps or walked up different things to be able to get someplace that isn't wheelchair accessible, which is unimaginable when he was first injured. Like, nobody expected that would happen within 6 months. And I attribute that to the amount of prayers, the amount of good deeds, the amount of positive energy that was sent our way, and his determination, and the same determination he had fighting in Gaza and fighting against evil and protecting the Jewish people is the same determination that he has now in his
So,
rehabilitation.
I mean, this is like, I don't think people can imagine even, right, what you've gone through, but definitely what Ari's gone through. I mean, to get injured, to your whole body change, right, to be a different person. But you said in the beginning that Ari hasn't changed. It's just physically changed. So how is he? Like, how does he be? I mean, his life has changed, right? How is he taken this?
His life has changed, but he always was a child who was able to separate what was important and not important. So in high school, I didn't always agree with what he thought was important versus what I thought was important, right? He never thought school was important, and I thought that school had some meaning. And now he's taken that same attitude in his rehab. So he doesn't focus on what he doesn't have. He focuses on what opportunities life has opened for him and what he can learn to do. And he progresses every single day in rehab. There isn't a day that he doesn't progress. And I think that gives him a lot of strength. I think the camaraderie around him gives him a lot of strength. He's met unbelievably interesting people through this rehab, like all these different donors that come to Tel HaShomer, he's met the president of Israel 4 times. They're on first name basis. They are old friends. It's opened up different things. And I think he's embracing all those opportunities. He's also has now started swimming. He swims. I mean, he always swam, but not in this intensity. He swims on a swim team 3 times a week, 2 kilometers every time. He really has taken it as life has changed for me, but he doesn't see himself as being, he doesn't see himself as being somebody who's disabled. He sees himself as somebody who has to learn how to do things differently than he used to, but he really has the same life, simchat chaim, we call it in Hebrew. He has the same life happiness that he had before. And he's really part of the advantage, if you can say in any sense, that the advantage of going through this type of process now is he has a lot of friends. He has 9 other friends that were injured with him. So obviously they were injured at different levels than he has, but he gets to spend time with them. They're together in the hospital. They're together in rehab. He's met tremendous amount of other people who have lost limbs and can spend time together, can see what works, what doesn't work. And also the fact that Israeli government really takes care of people who are disabled through the army, whether it's different benefits that he gets, different life opportunities that he has. And he's embracing all those different things and sees it as unbelievable doors that have been opened up to him.
I want to ask you one last question and then let you go, Leah. But I'm thinking of like our generation, you're in mine, where if we saw somebody without a limb in the streets of Jerusalem, right? It's definitely older, like around our parents' age, you would assume, okay, this was somebody who maybe got injured in the Yom Kippur War, right? And there were many, but there weren't as many as this war. Right. There's really dozens and dozens and dozens of soldiers who have lost 1, 2 limbs during this war, and I think that people see this, and you go around with your son. I'm curious, like, what message do you have for people who are out there who will bump into Ari, bump into a different Ari, right? Another soldier who has lost, who doesn't have a leg or 2 legs, or doesn't have an arm, or what's the message that you have for Israelis, for just general people who meet these soldiers?
Okay, so I'll give you a longer answer to your question. First of all, the reason there are so many is because the Israeli army and the have invested endless amount of energy and resources to save them. part of the reason that there aren't a lot of amputees from before. In any other war, Ari wouldn't have survived. And there are
Right.
many, many others like that. The fact that they talk about the golden hour, that the Israeli army tries to get everybody who's injured seriously to a hospital within an hour, is a change in the world way of treating wounded soldiers in the battlefield. It's unheard of. The blood that they have, that I spoke about earlier, that they have in the battlefield, has changed the way that people survive. And that's why there are so many more. And a big difference that and then I'll answer your question, a big difference that I see is the older generation, they all hide it. They wear long pants, they wear things to cover their prosthetics. The younger generation, they don't wear long pants. They wear short pants. They have nothing to, I don't want to say they're proud. Obviously, they would all love to have their limbs back if that would have been the choice, but they're proud of what they did. They're part of that. They went out to protect the Jewish people, and they have nothing to be ashamed of. And I'm proud of them for their attitude in that. And therefore they wear shorts all around. Like they have nothing to be ashamed of. And you see it all the time. The older people who come to visit are all wearing long pants, and the younger generation are all wearing shorts. And the message that I have for people is we all need to make the world more accessible. And in each one in our world that we're in, is that we need to see where a sidewalk doesn't have a way to get down, because everywhere you go, the world is not accessible. And so that's one of my things that I call out of people, how they can help. If you see on your sidewalk, on your street, that there's no wheelchair access to the sidewalk, call the municipality wherever you are. They'll often actually fix it.
And you're noticing this a lot more, I'm guessing. And yeah,
I thought I was a compassionate, caring person, and I've opened my eyes in terms of how Jerusalem in particular, because of the hills, etc., but it's everywhere.
Yeah. Well, Leah, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for sharing your story, Ari's story.
Thank you.
It's, I mean, there's, these are real heroes. And I think that's, when I see them and I see these soldiers, and I was just recently at synagogue at Shul a couple of weeks ago, and there was a soldier there who was wearing shorts. Now that I think of it, just like you said, and he was missing a leg, and he had a prosthetic on, and you just know right there, this guy, he's a hero. I mean, that's it, right? So, something happened to him, but it happened to him because he showed courage and bravery in amazing ways. So that's definitely the story of Ari. Thank you to you and Gabi and the whole family.
One last thing is the Jewish people will preserve. We've been around for thousands of years, and we will continue, even if the challenging times that we're going through, and we're going through probably one of the most challenging times in Jewish history, but we will survive. Am Yisrael Chai.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you. Bye.
Adi, thank you very much for joining us on the JPPI podcast. Let me start by saying Mazel Tov on your recent wedding. Congratulations from all of us. So you are a physical therapist who specializes, and I'm going to say a lot of things that probably make no sense because I don't know what these terms are, so you'll correct me. But traumatic brain injury, TBI, right? That's the official term. You recently, last few years, made Aliyah to Israel, and as a therapist who specializes in this, I'm going to guess that it's a pretty unique specialty, maybe in Israel, around the world. You'll fill in the blanks here for a moment, but we're talking because we're speaking about some of the injuries that Israeli soldiers have been sustaining during the duration of the war in Gaza. As I just spoke earlier on the episode with Leah Goldenhirsch, who's the mother of Ari Spitz, a soldier who lost both legs, one of his arms during the war. So we kind of spoke about what those challenges are for Ari and for an entire family to go through. But I'm curious, kind of from your perspective of somebody who's really been working in the hospital now for 11 months and has been dealing a lot with a lot of these injuries. Like, what are you seeing? What are the challenges? What has this experience been like?
Okay, so first of all, thank you for having me. So I'm a physical therapist. I work in intensive rehab, and my subspecialty has become brain injury. So TBI, like you said, anything from a concussion to severe brain injuries, which include minimally conscious patients. And the individual patients, we've kind of seen really bad injuries in the past wars, and we've seen injuries in Piguim in the past. But I think what has made these past 11 months so challenging and so intense and personal has been on multiple fronts. The first is usually you have 1 or 2 or 3 patients that are intense patients. And what we saw after the 7th were numbers that were just unfathomable in terms of the numbers of injuries, the severity of the injuries. And when you're dealing with not 3-4 individual patients that need so much attention, but you're dealing with 20, 30 intense rehab patients, just those numbers are a bit overwhelming. The positive side to that, because we have to look for the positive of every stage here, is that they're not alone. And because they came in as a group, there is a social support that it has been created, which in most scenarios you don't see. And because as a society and as a group, we've had them together now, we see things that are amazing. Everyone kind of strengthening the one next to each other. So there are positives to it, but as a clinician, to see those numbers is overwhelming. And then the kinds of injuries that we saw.
So can you describe for us, like what are these injuries? What does it mean that somebody has a traumatic brain injury? And then also, what does it mean to do physical therapy for somebody who has sustained that type of injury?
Okay, so those are great questions. Traumatic brain injury is any injury to the brain that is from an external force. So it could be a car accident, it could be a blunt trauma from a blast where someone is blown backwards and hits their head. It could be shrapnel or gunfire that has wounded them. It could be a stone, a rock that is thrown at them, something that has caused damage to the brain. And there are different severities. A concussion, which is a mild brain injury, could be something as simple as the person didn't lose consciousness and seems totally fine from the outside, but starts to see injuries or symptoms of suddenly they're more, their attention span, or they get tired much faster, or they're much more irritable. So it could be something as simple as that, to all the way to the other spectrum of severe brain injuries where the person is having difficulty knowing who they are, where they are, being able to speak, being able to move one or all of their extremities, being able to sit up, to stand, to walk, being able to have a conversation, to remember people, to concentrate. The list goes on. There's a whole, it affects on a cognitive level, on a behavioral level, on an emotional level, and on a physical level. And that's why the brain injuries, when we hear a brain injury, even if it's a mild or severe brain injury, it's something that affects their everyday life and everyone around them.
Can I ask a very ignorant question here? So pardon it.
Go ahead.
So if God forbid somebody suffers from that type of injury, which is, more than a concussion, let's say, so it's like what you just described, impacting all spheres and aspects of life. Does it ever heal itself, or is that an unknown?
So the good and the bad about the brain is that you never know, but I'm a medical person, so the word miracle seems to be unnatural to use in this setting, but it's unbelievable to see. You have some people that on MRI, they're not supposed to function, and they go back to fully functional lives. And they might have certain impairments, but they're functional impairments. They can live, they can get married, they can have children, they can have full lives, and they have something that they deal with. And you have people that have more severe injuries, but that they go on to fully function, have very, very happy lives. So and we don't know to prognose it necessarily. You have all these objective measures that in the beginning, if someone had this sort of an injury, then within a certain amount of months, you should be able to tell what their prognosis is. It's not actually true if we're looking at people. I have a patient that I've been working with for 10 years, since Tsukeitan. This is a person that was not expected to open their eyes or talk. This is a person that is walking and talking, and is beating the odds, continuously getting better every month. So we don't know, and that's why it's so important to give as much attention and rehab and pass it over to the families and the friends, because it's a lifelong thing. Did that answer it?
So tell me, soldiers in particular, there's
Sure.
been dozens, maybe more with TBI. Tel HaShomer is known for its rehabilitation centers, also for orthopedics and for brain injuries, just in general. And there are thousands of soldiers who have sustained different variation and degrees of wounds and injuries since the beginning of this war. I mean, just one number that I saw the other day, I don't know how real it is, but that the IDF, as a result of so many soldiers who have either been killed or wounded, is out over close to like 20 battalions almost, in terms of just the manpower itself. But the question is, can, you know, when you see these soldiers, and I'm guessing a lot of their wounds are also explosions or explosive devices or houses and ambushes and buildings that come down on them. We've had a number of different situations and stories of those kind. You know, soldiers are supposed to wear helmets. They're supposed to have protective gear. How much does that necessarily protect them in that sense?
So I think our units officially are very much protected, but there's only so much that it can protect when someone is blown meters away, or that there is an RPG that hits them. So, you know, I katonti to understand the level of what happens, you know, on the ground. But what I will say in terms of you know, these individuals, we're seeing not just the brain injury. The brain injury usually comes along with fractures and multiple revision surgeries. We had one of the other things that differentiates this war is because the numbers were so intense and there were so many life-saving surgeries right after the 7th, or on the 7th, that a lot of them need revisions now, because the goal then was to save their lives. And now a lot of the things is to get them to function. People didn't know if a lot of these soldiers would make it, and thank God they have, but now they need to get back to life, which means they're having a lot of other revisioned surgeries. And so when we're looking at how protected they were, you know, the big picture, they're alive. They're alive, and the things that needed to be in place in order to save their life once they got through the medical system were there, and it's unbelievable. But they're not out of the woods yet, even after they've started shikun. This is a lifelong thing. But I don't know if it's connected to your question, but another little thing that, you know, is coming up is the thought that so many of them went through an injury, have gone through rehab, and many of them have been begging to get back in there. And many of them have gone back, even though we said, give it a couple more months, they fought to get back into their units to go help their fellow soldiers. So I think that says
so talk to us about that a little. I mean, you know, you're working with these soldiers. I mean, I'm guessing, you know, whenever I meet soldiers, especially those who really have been through hell, and they want to go back, it just blows your mind. I mean, you know, what is it about these young men who just have this burning desire, and despite their wounds, I know one soldier who lost a leg, now has a prosthetic, still learning to walk, who goes to his unit a few times a week. I'm not sure exactly what he can do there, but he just wants to be
there. So I'll say that I know that there is an insane amount of politics that are flying around. Doesn't matter if you're on the right or the left, things are a mess. And we're hearing a lot of ugly things very high up. But when you meet these people, you are just blown away by how amazing the individuals are. And, you know, we joked about a lazy generation. They're incredible. They are very clear on what's important. They are very clear in the fact that when they have a responsibility, they want to hold up to it, and they want to support their brothers, and they want to make sure that their home is safe. And that drive is unbelievable. And you see them, I feel like an old lady sometimes next to these little kids who are, you know, 18, 19, 20, 25. Sometimes they're reservists who are in their 30s, but they still feel like little kids. And they're so driven, and they're such good human beings. And you see them, I wasn't, you know, I'm saying they support each other. They're constantly, someone who is in so much pain and has one leg that's totally not functional and can barely speak, he'll see someone else walking and he'll start like cheering him on. There's something about them that is inspiring for whoever sees them. And it's not fake, and it's not for the cameras. It's when they are at the lowest and they are fighting the hardest to get back to where they are. And when you ask them many times, I've said to them, enough, why do I need to discharge you to go back? Stay home, eat ice cream. You've done your part. You get all the credit. You're already given the name of a hero. Stay home. I will cook for you anything you want. Stay home. and timely, and but the work's not done. Why should someone else do this? Like, we need to make sure that we're safe, and we need to. He's like, how am I going to stay home? My brother, my sister, my neighbor, my niece, we need to protect them. And there's such a strong drive about that. And it doesn't take away from their ability to zoom out and get into the dirty of politics and the stupidity that is everyday life. But it's a very, very clear understanding of what we're fighting and what we're fighting for, and how in a second this was almost taken away from us. And that is something that we hear over and over and over again. And it's incredible. It's exceptionally humbling. It also makes you feel guilty for not wanting to go to the gym at the end of the day because you've had a hard day, and these people are like nonstop fighting and working out and anything they need to do. And it's unbelievable. It's really, I can't tell you why. I would keep them home with some ice cream and give them a bunch of blankets and some Netflix. But luckily, I don't have a decision in this.
Well, on that very moving note, I want to thank you, Adi, for joining us and for sharing with us this story. It was very inspirational. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode on the Jewish People's Podcast. We will be back on Monday and Thursday. As always, you can catch us on YouTube, on the website of Times of Israel, and of course on